2 years, and they only come up with 4 pages, and you come up with a book.
Is that funny? I didn't have to investigate anybody. I didn't have to investigate anybody.
Or fire anybody.
Here, here's some extras in case other folks who can't be here right now want a copy.
Johnny.
So here's basically what we wanted to do. Kaylin's going to start off by talking about some general issues. This is going to be not formal, just raise your hand, do whatever you want, answer questions, yell at us, whatever. And then I'm going to talk about, I'm basically going to give you a 15-minute spiel that I give to the bar exam kids about, and you'll get it faster than they do, on open door law and access to public records, and then ask me any and all questions. Those are kind of the main things we want to touch on.
Do we want to pull up the PowerPoint anywhere, or just?
If you guys want, great. If not, we'll send you the PowerPoint anyway, electronically, so you have it.
Yeah.
You have that printout, it's the same exact thing.
Good.
So go for it.
Any issue with me sitting? Is that okay?
That's
So
fine.
Get
questions I
comfy.
can-
It's just,
I figured that'd be easier.
comfortable.
So
You can make
basically, my part first is kind of just about the powers of a town council in general, different positions, mostly the president and the clerk treasurer. And then we talk a little bit about ordinances and how meetings will be conducted, like procedural things. So just feel, God, this bag's huge. Just feel free to interrupt me at any time and ask questions. It's pretty basic and simple and not too super long, so that we can kind of just talk, and if you guys have questions about anything, just feel free to stop me throughout. So first, just the powers and duties of the town council in general. They are statutory. I have the statute listed there. The 3 big things that it talks about are adopting ordinances and resolutions to perform the town functions. And we talked a little bit today, Manny and I, that I wanted to talk about the difference between ordinances and resolutions, because that's something that's always kind of tripped me up a little bit in the past. Ordinances are more formal, and I'll go through later how they have to be read twice, usually. There's a few exceptions we'll talk about too. Resolutions are more for temporary issues, things that might not be as important or as formal, and they generally have to only be read once. So things like, that we talk about changing the speed limit, or things like zoning, all of those would have to be done through an ordinance, and they would have to go through the formal ordinance process that we'll talk about later.
So the idea is, sorry, jump in. So the idea is there's the voice vote, where you do the motion and the vote. There's a resolution. It's a little bit of a step up from a voice vote. You want to formalize an official position in town. And the ordinance, think about it as something, the resolution deals with an issue of the day or an issue that's temporary, the way I look at it. An ordinance, think of it as just like, General Assembly passed a law. It's something that's going to keep with you and stay with you and inform the actions of the town from now until whenever. So if you're kind of looking in your mind about the ordinance is like your law, a resolution has the force and effect of your vote and your decision, but it's on a single issue usually, or minor issues, and a voice vote is just you taking action on an item that doesn't necessarily have to be formalized in any specific way.
And with ordinances, some ordinances have fees, right, associated
Correct.
with them? And resolutions don't, or do some resolutions have fees?
Some resolutions can, but again, I would recommend that you put anything with a fee, anything associated with a kind of forward-looking, that folks will have to refer to in assessing it in an ordinance, because then it'll have to be codified, and then you can tell folks, listen, not only did you have one opportunity, this was advertised, it was published, then you had another opportunity to come to a meeting. And an ordinance has a presumption of validity after it's passed, which means that it is on its face after it's passed. Everybody presumes that it was passed correctly, and that's enforceable law. So challenging it is a lot harder once you go through that process. And again, I did a 4-hour presentation. I think you were at a 4-hour presentation on just ordinances last year.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot to it, but in your mind, when you're kind of looking at issues, an ordinance is something that is essentially gonna stay with the town, it's gonna be in that book, that you're gonna have to reference, and that other folks are gonna have to, depend on and abide by, that's right.
And I've done resolutions before that are more just opinions, like the council kind of thinks that this would be a good idea, or the council supports this. So things like that would be more appropriate as a resolution.
Yep.
Another duty that the town has, the town council, is to deal with property interests. So purchasing property, holding property, selling property for town use, and then adopt and use a common seal is the other thing that's listed by statute. But the ordinance resolution part is basically just passing local laws, so that encompasses a lot of things. So we'll talk about the clerk treasurer position. I'm sure you are pretty brushed up on this after the seminar.
You've only been assistant for what? 10
I know,
years?
but, I've been through a lot of classes, I've got the certifications, but it's different when you're setting in the seat
Oh, yeah,
of that,
yeah.
it really is. And I'm still learning, so I appreciate that,
So the clerk treasurer is both the clerk of the town and the fiscal officer of the town. So we'll talk about the fiscal officer aspect first. On the slide, I've listed all the statutory powers, basically anything dealing with receipt and expenditure of money for the town. So keeping track of money, paying money out, of course that is after the council passes an ordinance or moves to do something to expend that money. So basically managing finances, making investments, preparing budgets, anything fiscal like that is going to be a job of the clerk treasurer.
And any screw up is on the clerk treasurer, is on her bond and is on her personal. So this, yeah, it's a serious deal.
Yeah.
It
When
is.
you're talking about money, because it's going to be her bum on the line if there's an issue. I have one client, I'm not going to name names, but this person does absolutely everything wrong because she never goes to the stuff Jennifer goes to and doesn't know. So not only is she putting herself at risk and the city at risk, she's putting your bond rating at risk. So that when you need to do a kind of project like you're about to do, nobody's going to buy your bonds. You're not going to be able to do a darn thing, and the town or that particular place will fall apart. So it's serious business.
And
So whenever somebody mentions,
ahead.
mentions, your bond rating might get affected, that's no joke. If your bond rating gets affected and lowered, nobody, New York Mellon, who buys a lot of these, but they will not buy them anymore. And that's why you see the mayor of Indianapolis always going up and he met with Bank of New York Mellon last week because they wanted to make sure that he presented their fiscal responsibility, that they're doing everything the way they're supposed to do, so they keep buying their bonds, so that way they can finance all those projects. Same thing for every other municipality in this state.
So it's like a credit rating.
That's exactly what it is, Tony. It's exactly what it is.
So aside from that, not that that isn't a big enough job in itself, the clerk treasurer also is the clerk for purposes of town council meetings. So she or he, depending on who it is, attends the meetings, records the proceedings, and I thought it was interesting. I went through some of this town's specific code to see if there was anything different or interesting about the role of the clerk treasurer, and I did find that, so the council president will call the meeting to order, and then per statute, or per ordinances passed here, then the clerk treasurer should call a roll of the members and make sure that there's a quorum, so make sure of a majority of the council members are present, and then announce this on the record before the meeting starts. So I just thought that was something interesting that was here on the books, and that, I don't know.
Yeah.
That we don't do.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's good. Like, we can obviously tell if a quorum is here, but I mean, it's good to have
You can
on the
tell from
record.
notes, but it sets the tone.
Yeah. Also something that's interesting, I know Jewel, I think, talked about this at your training recently, but that you would be you're not a council member, but you're an ex officio council member for breaking a tie. So if the council is voting on something, And we'll talk about voting later and what it takes to pass an ordinance, but you would be the tiebreaker in those circumstances.
So, as a clerk treasurer, though, I was wondering, I mean, I know it's not my role to make decisions and whatnot, but am I allowed to give my opinion, even as a citizen, if something is, I'm thinking, wow, that's, you know what I'm saying?
You
As
are,
a
you
clerk
don't
treasurer,
have
how,
a
I mean, you know,
vote.
I don't want to overstep and think,
No, you don't have,
Even-
you obviously, you don't have a vote, but you can, given proper procedures, voice your comment during the discussion, or even during the public session. That's one thing I wanna, you know, as these things progress, it's always nice for people to manage their expectations. I've been here when we've had 30 people here, I've been here when we've had 2 people here. And it's different managing those, so what I always recommend is to have one policy. If you're gonna have a vote on an issue, take a motion, take a second, discuss it, then vote, but don't take public comment at that time. Take public comment at a set period, which I usually recommend at the end, and I recommend that you because here's the thing.
Yeah,
What
I
shocks
talk
everybody-
about this later about
Here's what shocks everybody.
the issue that happened last
from the
time.
last meeting?
Yes, Manny heard all about that.
Oh yes, I said it here. She starts fighting. So here's what shocks everybody. Do you need to have public comment? Does municipality need to have public comment? No, you don't. But if you start doing it, you got to keep doing it. That's the law. So you guys have done it forever since I've been here, so you need to keep doing it. But it doesn't mean you give free rein to people. Including council members, including Jennifer, including anybody, me, whatever, you can cut off discussion of a topic and call it back to order on a vote. Or when public comments are being thrown about, you can accept it or do what you guys want to do, but I recommend having a set time for public comment, having people, raise their hand to be recognized on the record, and then setting a time. 4 minutes, 5 minutes, however you want to do it. Nobody wants to be here until 10 o'clock. And then cutting it off. You can limit it, you can be reasonable in limiting anything. If it's disruptive, like apparently last time was, you can cut it off immediately and call the meeting to order, ask the person to leave, do whatever you need to do. But if it's disruptive, you don't need to hear it at all. If it goes on and on and on, like some people do in my other places, you can cut it off, say, I'm sorry, we allow for 4 minutes, your 4 minutes is up.
Hear that, Toby?
I'm glad to hear
Well, I
you.
heard it.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you on
I
another.
wish the board would hear it.
Yeah.
Last meeting, I asked 3 times for, close the meeting, and I didn't get a response. And we had some individuals here that wanted to continue that talk with the people out there
Right,
that didn't even pertain to the meeting. So, when the president asked 3 times for, a motion, that's a pretty good hint.
Yeah, so I would, at that point, I would call the meeting to order
Yeah.
and say, we're public discussion is over, and I need all entertainment motion to adjourn. And if nobody wants to adjourn, you can adjourn it yourself.
Okay.
Sorry, continue.
Okay, going on, we will talk about your role, leading into that a little bit. So the council president is the executive, responsible for signing ordinances, orders, and resolutions, and an ordinance cannot be adopted, so it will not be in full force and effect until the council president has signed it. We talk a little bit about what ordinances later have to be published, but just that's a general thing. All ordinances, regardless, need to be signed by the executive, which is the president. Also, presiding over the meetings, like kind of what we were just talking about there. We'll talk about it a little later. I do have a little bit about public comments, but I believe the Atlanta Code of Ordinances says that it is the town council president's role to cut off anything that's disorderly. So that's exactly what we were talking about. That's in your purview, totally acceptable to do. You would also be the one to call executive sessions, which I'm guessing you'll talk about later with the open door law stuff. So that would be the role of the president as well. And then before I talk about actually conducting meetings, Robert's Rules of Order, does anybody have any more questions about the clerk treasurer, the president, the town council in general? Okay. So the next part is actually about procedure. Looking back to through the code of ordinances, it says that Robert's Rules of Order may be adopted by the council, even if it has never been specifically adopted, which I'm guessing it has somewhere over time. It's still the best manual to follow. It's followed by many decision-making groups, councils. Most cities and towns have adopted it, and they all, like this one does, just say we adopt the most recent version, but nothing changes too much. So there's a lot in there. It's basically a huge book. I've tried to look through it before. It can get kind of tedious, but I'll go over some of the main points, and some of the things are also codified in Atlanta-specific code too. Okay, so specific things in the Atlanta Code I thought would be interesting to talk about. 31.44 says that prior to making a motion or speaking, a council member should be recognized and named by the president, or if the president's not here, whoever is presiding as the chair of the meeting. And the discussion should be limited to what's actually being discussed. So if someone wants to talk about something and Toby says, okay, so-and-so, go ahead, that should be what's discussed. I feel like that's a good way to keep meetings on topic, keep things from getting out of hand or disorganized, disorderly. So that's something that's specifically in the Atlanta Code as well, and in Robert's Rules of Order.
So again, practically the way it would work is, and like somebody told me about computers, they're only as smart as the user. So the council can only act through motion. Anything else you say is whatever. Until you actually move and approve something, or through resolution or through ordinance do something, it's as if you didn't meet. The minutes will be there, but so what? So the practical procedure is, say I will entertain a motion on this, and then somebody will make a motion, and I can always help with that, or Kaylin can help with that, wording of the motion, and then I'll have a second, and if there's a second, then I will put it up for discussion. Discussion can go on for as long as you want, but limit the discussion. And again, you can call it, you can reel it back in. And then after discussion, say there's nothing else, I'll take a vote on it. And then you guys vote like you usually do. And that, on every single motion, and when in doubt, take a motion on it. That's my advice. When in doubt, take a motion on it. If you think there should be a motion on it, go ahead and do it. Because it hurts you less having a motion on it than not having a motion on it. And we'll get to questions about, well, what if we don't? What can happen? Well, I mean, a lot of things can happen, including all your stuff's going to be invalidated. Actions that you took without motion, or actions that you took without a proper vote, or actions that you took can reel back in decisions, reel back in resolutions, reel back in stuff that you need to prove that you've done. For example, when in passing all these, when Bose does your bond, part of our role is going to be as local council ensuring that everything that was done in support of that bond issuance was done pursuant to rule. So if we end up saying, and we have to be honest about it, if we end up saying, shoot, there was not a proper vote taken on that resolution, therefore this bond can't be sold, that ruins the whole project. And there are other examples, but that's kind of a drag where you go throughout the stuff and there's so much thrown at you, I know that. But ultimately, you say, we don't need to take a vote on it, or you don't take a vote on it, or the vote is improper, or whatever. It can invalidate something as big as that bond issuance and that project that is, as you guys know, it has timeliness issues all along the way. Mm-hmm. Yep.
The question, I know in the past, regardless whoever was leading the meeting, the discussion would come up, and this has happened to all of us, I'm sure, that we'll have the floor, and you're trying to make have a train of thought, and somebody else sitting on the board interrupts, and 9 times out of 10 it's something that's not even pertaining to what you were trying to get across, and it kind of jumps here, jumps there, jumps here, and eventually we get to where we're after a bunch of, and then we take a second, or a motion and a second, and to pass it. So that procedure you're saying is really not very good.
It's not good. Because then what it does again, and it screws up the record.
Okay.
It screws up the minutes, and further, it you guys are all elected. You need to be recognized, and you need to be the one talking. And we should have enough respect for each other to do that.
Yes,
Whether we disagree or not, it doesn't matter. Let's not be like the kids in Congress. Let's actually, you guys are doing more important stuff. Let's actually get to business. And so, no, and it happens everywhere, Toby. You'd be shocked. It happens everywhere. No matter how big the town or city is, no matter how small, it happens absolutely everywhere. But the best run meetings are the meetings that do exactly that. There's an issue, somebody is recognized, they speak, they recognize somebody else, they speak. If there's a back and forth, fine. Then you move forward.
Okay, and one more real question.
Yeah.
This is an example. Let's say we're trying to decide whether we want to accept this as a piece of furniture, for example. So the subject comes up, and Pam's got to, whether she wants to buy this or purchase this, whatever. Then what you're saying is that we need to resolve that before somebody else says, well, we'll purchase it, but I want it white, or I want it green. Now you're going to a different subject. You're not talking about purchasing, you're talking about decorating. Are you following?
That would be the best way.
That's what's been happening in
Absolutely.
a lot of our
Yeah.
meetings. And so if Pam, her train of thought is to whether or not she wants to buy this, which is the most important thing,
Yep.
Beautiful.
right? Not what color it is. So I think that's happened to all of us.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean, it happens, but the best practice, is to resolve one issue first and then move on to the next issue.
And then you can, I don't want to unnecessarily complicate it, but you can break it up into several motions if you wanted to. The first, okay, you're ending, is there any more discussion on whether you want to buy the cup? No. Okay, I'll entertain a motion on whether we want to buy the cup. Motion, is there a second? Second. Any further discussion on the cup? No.
Yeah, I want it blue.
We'll save that for next. Then you vote on whether you buy the cup, and now we're going to turn to the color of the cup. Do I have a motion on blue, or is there any discussion on what color it should be? And then you do it that way. Or you can wait and then do a compound motion on, you wait, you have all these discussions, okay, we've discussed the cup needs to be blue. Do I have a motion that we buy a blue cup at this size? Yes, I move we buy a blue cup at this size from this person. Do I have a second? Yes, and then you move forward. So you can do it either way is fine.
I see.
It just depends on how you want to do it. But you're absolutely right. Everybody should have their opportunity to. It's a lot more clear on the record to do that.
And listening to the tapes, typing up the minutes, it's like sometimes it is
Well, it's
like
like going
all
through a
over.
maze.
here's a
Like, so I'm like,
conversation, and
okay.
here's a conversation, and here's a
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
Now, is it
It's
his
normal
role?
conversation.
Is it his
Yeah.
role to bring that other conversation to a halt
Yes.
while
Yes.
something else is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a tough role to have. I know it is.
Oh, absolutely.
But you got to do it, and we can help. If I'm here, I'll help. If Caitlin's here, she can say, you can call it to order and move on discussing a different topic. And we do that everywhere we go.
So you'll keep us in line, huh?
Yes.
I know it's hard.
I know. I should have kept us in line better last time, but that guy was a
Kinda
little
took you
scary.
by
I was like,
surprise.
if Manny had been here, I know it would have been.
And
But I'll be prepared.
and sometimes it's better coming from me or Caitlin and saying, we
Yeah.
can discuss that topic later. I recommend that as a point of order, we move on. And for clarity of the record or whatever you want justification you want to give.
So that also means if we have an audience members want to say something, they have to state their name.
Oh, I talk about public comments
Okay.
next. Yeah,
Oh, no
after
doubt.
I
That's
included
what
that
we
after
should do.
last time.
It should be on the record who's
Yes,
saying
they
what
sh-
and
it
what
should
they're
be.
saying.
It
It
totally-
absolutely
you're
should
right.
be.
Yes.
And for more reason than one.
Yeah.
Listen, if you're going to come to my town and bitch about stuff, put your name on the record, let me know you're a resident.
Yeah.
Yes.
We do that at every other place. Absolutely.
Cool.
And so, in line with that, there's also something in the Atlanta Code saying that when one member is speaking, there shouldn't be side conversations. I haven't really watched if that's going on, but I can see how anywhere that would be hard to do because you're sitting around like this, you're comfortable, you all know each other, it might be easy. But like we talked about, to keep everything flowing and to make sure everything's on the record, because we don't want these two over here having a conversation that could be really relevant and everyone might need to know it, but it's not on the record. because there's another conversation over here. So that's just a good practice to follow, and it is on the books. So Manny talked a little bit about public comments, that it's not required by Indiana law, but since you guys do allow it, it should be on the agenda. I think it is on the agenda.
We've never had that on the agenda.
I would put it last, and that will kind of dissuade random interjections throughout, is that there's a time for public comments. We don't even have to allow this, but we do, and it's at the end.
And then that gives you additional cover. If it's on the agenda, say, hey, I love it, I love what you're saying. You'll have an opportunity to say it later.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we need to get through
And that's
town
for,
business
that's
before we.
all the points that we've covered in the meeting, the public discussion is
Correct.
after.
Correct.
Okay.
And also on the books here is that aside from the time allotted for public discussion, so like I said, it would generally be the last thing. And I've seen before where they limit it like 2 minutes per person. I'm not necessarily saying you have to do that. I mean, if you start having really big issues, I think that's always
Yeah,
an
that's too quick.
option.
Right. So I recommend limiting it to getting below 4 minutes is when you have a group of 100 people, which has happened in other places. Beyond that, for this town, I think 4 or 5 minutes is plenty of time.
And so generally, it's on the books here that except for the time allotted, someone cannot talk or make a public comment unless a majority of you all agree to that. So
Outside of the public.
outside of the public comment time. So if someone wants to say something in the middle, if you guys are making a motion, someone has this, public comment they really just need to say right then, that is not even allowed per the ordinances here unless the majority of you guys vote and agree to let that person talk. And I do think everyone's name should be on the record, like we discussed.
Okay.
Anyone making public comment at any time. And we already talked about if it becomes disorderly or if there's outbursts like last time. Toby, feel free to just say this is disorderly, it's not permitted. Cut off the public comments there.
Call the meeting.
Call the meeting. Yeah. All right. Anything else about public comments, or now I'm going to talk about ordinances for a while. So any questions about comments or meeting procedures in general? Okay. So typically, Indiana law doesn't specify whether ordinance have to be read 2 or 3 times, but generally cities are 3 and towns do 2. Like I said, resolutions are generally only 1 time. There's also
You need to lock the door.
It's an open.
It's open.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So there is one exception when ordinances can be passed on a first reading, and that's when 2/3 of all the elected council members, not just the council members here, vote to pass the ordinance, and that has to be after unanimous consent of members present to consider the ordinance. So if there's,
Okay, so that's.
I know.
When I did that presentation, that conversation lasted 2 hours.
So I'm confused now. but-
Yeah.
Oh, and you should be. Literally, we said, who does that? Who passes an ordinance? Raise your hand if you pass an ordinance on first reading. 90% of people raise their hand. Without using a specific procedure for doing it. So to pass an ordinance, it's presented, and then if nothing changes, present it again at the next meeting, and then you can pass it at that meeting. If you want to pass, and I don't recommend this unless it's an emergency, if you want to pass an ordinance on first reading, you have to follow this specific procedure. First, everybody who's here, everybody unanimously has to vote to consider to suspend the rules and consider passing it on first reading. Then 2/3 of everybody elected, not everybody here, everybody elected, has to pass it. Otherwise, you cannot pass an ordinance on first reading, and most of the state of Indiana does it wrong, or did it wrong until we presented it. It'll be rare,
But just for you to review it.
it'll be rare for you guys to do that.
Our runs.
I think I've done
of our
it
fire
twice,
department.
maybe in the last 5-6 years,
Yeah.
just because it was an emergency situation.
And so there are some ordinances that always have to have more than 1 reading, so 2 here or more if the statute specifies, and those would be zoning ordinances, zoning ordinance amendments. And I think for town, increasing the number of town council members, you can never just pass that using that procedure. So generally, a majority vote of the council is required to pass an ordinance, and that means a majority vote of all elected members, not just members present. So a majority vote of everybody elected is required to pass. In some statutes, I can't think of any right off the top of my head, but require a 2/3 vote. And once again, that's talking about 2/3 of the elected members, not just 2/3 of people present.
Right, so if there are 3 of you here, you can have a meeting, you can make motions, you can do all that, you can't pass an ordinance.
And so ordinances generally are adopted when they are signed by the executive, which is the town council president, but there are specific exceptions. So some statutes specifically say this kind of ordinance has to be published in accordance with 531, which I think you'll maybe talk about. No? Okay, I'll talk about
It's
it in a
in
minute.
there, but
So that's the case with some specific ordinances, and also any ordinance that carries a penalty or a forfeiture, which we looked at today and is not defined in that statute, but generally something saying littering and you'll be charged $50. That's clearly a penalty. So any new ordinance that you establish and that is adopted still has to be published. I think it's 30 days according to 531. So
Yes.
publish the 2 newspapers, typically how Jennifer publishes like meeting announcements, but you have to publish the ordinance because it has a penalty. And I believe it's 30 days, it has to be published 30 days before it can take effect. So those are just special things to look out for with anything where you're going to penalize people, anything with a fine attached to it. And the last thing dealing with ordinances is recording them, and that is another job of the clerk treasurer. So an ordinance must be passed. Some of them have to be published if it carries a penalty or a fine, or if the statute says these kind of ordinances have to be published. And also, ordinances should be recorded. The statute doesn't really say when, it just says within a reasonable time after passage. And after you record it, it's presumptive evidence that the ordinance was adopted, and that the council followed adequate procedures to do so. This slide talks a little bit about what all has to be included with the ordinance. That would probably be most important for you. So, any questions about ordinances, resolutions, publication before we move on to open door?
nothing, okay. No. Okay, so all public agencies in the state of Indiana have to abide by the open door law and the Access to Public Records Act. Indiana legislature has said everything you guys do has to be public. There's a presumption that everything's public, absent a few exceptions. So first, open door law just means all of your meetings have to be to the public, open to the public. What is a meeting? A meeting is a gathering of the majority of the town council for any purpose to conduct business. Conducting business can be as simple as receiving a piece of information,
So that
telling somebody something about town business, okay? So that's why I harp with everybody on this. If there are 3 of you in a room and there hasn't been a meeting called and you're discussing anything related to the town, it's an illegal meeting, flat out. Every meeting, the majority of the town council have to give notice within 48 hours of that meeting. Now 2 days, it specifically says 48 hours. So if your meeting is at 7, 48 hours prior, you have to have that notice in the door. So all of those meetings have to be public, and a public meeting is a gathering of the majority of you to conduct business, which means receiving any piece of information, sharing any piece of information. Now, don't be worried if you guys see each other at breakfast at the restaurant on a Saturday. A chance encounter doesn't count. Training doesn't count. Visiting a site for a real estate development doesn't count. The law contemplates that you have to do those things as a normal operation of your duties. Now, if you meet each other at a restaurant and all of a sudden there's an open table and you guys meet for 5 minutes and discuss town business, that's a legal meeting. What's the penalty for that? Well, the penalty for that is that any decision you make at that illegal meeting can be unwound.
If you take it to a meeting though, and then pass it, you don't just act on that private meeting, but if you take that decision to the public meeting, and then
Yeah.
motion and do all that stuff with it,
That's probably proper.
Okay.
If you're basing that motion, and if you're basing that decision off of things you discussed and shared at the private, at the illegal meeting, that is improper. Now, what's the penalty for that? Well, the penalty could be money out of your pocket. So there's a public access counselor, the current one is Luke Britt, and that was established because the courts didn't want to deal with all these issues. And so it gives people the ability, if you have an illegal meeting, to complain to him. He's gonna make you answer within 30 days. If you don't answer, or if he rules against you, you might have to pay the other people's fees, attorney's fees. And if you're the one doing that illegal meeting, you might have to pay a penalty yourself. Not the town, you. So on top of unwinding stuff, if somebody complains, and you'd be surprised,
Oh.
anybody can complain.
we've
Anybody can say,
complained,
yeah.
we've complained. And we
Well,
see no,
Complain formally.
we did with this Jackson Township thing, and it went to naught. To naught.
Formally to whom?
The Public Access Council.
Yeah,
And he did what?
No,
nothing.
no action,
He has to render a decision.
no action.
He has to render a decision. There had to have been a decision.
Where do we find that decision?
It's available on the Public Access Council's website. You can search for it. It's usually by a letter.
If he even got it.
Well, I mean, I just know that all that stuff that was down there, it was in the papers, it was all this stuff, it was reported to the Public Access Counselor, and nothing came of it.
Nothing.
Well, so I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't
There-
either.
There is a procedure for doing it, and there is a procedure for unwinding it. And if he rules against you, you're liable for their fees. If he rules for you, you're fine. And then you can go, after that, you can go to the court. The same thing applies with public records. So if somebody, everything that's shared between you, among you, is open to disclosure under the Public Records Act. A public record is anything that's created by the town for town business. Is your email a public record? Yep. Are your texts public records? Yes. They're on my private phone. They're about town business. If it's my private email, it's about town business. If it's responsive and somebody requests it, you have to turn it over. And if you don't, you have personal penalties against you. They can unwind decisions, same type of issues start. If somebody comes in person and requests certain records, first, call us. Second, if they come in person, you have 24 hours to respond. If they call the phone, you have 24 hours to respond. If they send it in a request by mail, you have 7 days to respond. A response doesn't mean you give them everything right away, because there'll be stuff that's privileged, there'll be stuff that's not responsive, their request may be too broad, a whole bunch of issues we can discuss, but the response initially could be, we received it, thanks, we're looking into it, we'll respond to you within a reasonable amount of time. If it's a big record request, a reasonable amount of time could be, who knows, 10, 15 days. If it's a small records request, it can be smaller. So that's why, I don't know, a while ago, I recommended the entire council designate one email for all of your town business. Don't mix it with anybody else. Don't mix it with all your personal stuff. And only, don't call each other instead of texting. Because otherwise you're just inviting problems. Yep.
I was wondering if I received a text from say Triad, for example.
Yeah.
And they said, John, we can do this project, but
Yep.
I have to have this, I have to have that. I would have to call a meeting or bring it to the attention of the board before that would go any further. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
No matter what it is.
Not necessarily no matter what it is, there's some
Okay.
things you can do at your discretion, that's just normal course of business. And as an executive, you have to do, meeting with potential prospects, meeting with developers, that kind of stuff. It'd be nice eventually to loop in the board and to have a meeting or to have a site visit, but you don't necessarily have to do that, no, it's your prerogative as an executive. But anything that's gonna require, you know, the board spending money, the board taking some sort of action to hire somebody, the board taking a different direction, to cancel a contract, all that stuff, is gonna need to be brought at a public meeting. Now, do you need to have a public meeting every time you talk to me or Triad or somebody else about a project? No. You guys can do that independently, and you're fine to do that, it's a normal course of operation. Anytime you need to take action on something, then you present that action item for the public.
Well, I guess
So
what I'm
lining that
getting at,
up. Sorry, go ahead.
I guess what I was getting at is if I was having what's allowed in the conversation between me and this person
Yeah.
on text.
Yeah.
You know, can I make opinions? Can I,
Yeah.
you know, my opinions may not be those of the board.
That's fine.
So, I mean,
But-
we're talking about legality,
Yeah.
legal meetings and such, you
Yeah.
know, I just didn't know how far a person could.
No, so that's a really good point though. So you don't have to agree with anybody. You can do whatever you want. I would just have the expectation that that'll end up in the paper.
Okay,
So that should be the mindset. Have the expectation that that's gonna be disclosed to somebody eventually.
okay, I understand.
The problem with email and access to open door law is, and another kind of meeting called a serial meeting. The serial meeting is the Bobby Knight rule, which is two of you meet. It's not the majority, man. Yeah, we talked about business, but it's not the majority. But Toby and I met, and then Toby and Murray met, and Toby and Pam met. Now we're getting into an issue where you're discussing the same thing, and you're trying to you know, screw around the open door law. That's what they essentially did to Bobby Knight. That's the Bobby Knight rule serial meeting. That's still an illegal meeting, even though it's not the majority of you at any one time. It's the majority of you within a short time span on the same issue. Same thing with email. Same thing with kind of joint phone calls. If it's the majority of you and there's an expected immediate response on email, there's a back and forth, that's an illegal meeting. And it's also discoverable, and you have to disclose it if somebody requests it. Another thing is, just because you copy me or Caitlin on something, doesn't necessarily mean it's protected by attorney-client privilege. I have to be advising you on something. She has to be advising you on something. If it's something we're looped in on 5-10 emails later, that's not attorney-client privilege and it should be disclosed. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. Any questions? So exceptions to the open door law are whenever we call the executive session. So there are some instances, the executive session is just another word for private meeting, where you still have to follow and call the executive session the same way, 48 hours before, but you have to put why you're having the executive session, the statutory reference that allows you to do it, and then you can shut people off. Discussing employee performance, real estate development and negotiation, litigation, threatened or pending, any of those things and others are subject, you can do executive session. And that's your responsibility as a president to call those sessions and invite and disinvite people outside of the council to come to that session. Those meetings, you have to take, you do not take minutes at those meetings. You don't record it. You just say, you have the notice, you have the reference. An important thing to understand, at those meetings, you can't take any action. So even if you're discussing something, you can discuss it all day long, you can make recommendations, you can have opinions, you can have hypotheticals about what you may or may not do in this case or that case. So you cannot have a vote to take any action. Any action you ever take has to be taken in a public meeting. and the executive session, a private meeting, is limited. That discussion is only limited to what you called it for. So if there are two potential reasons you need an executive session, list both of those reasons so you can talk about both of those things. If you're only talking about one of those things, you only list one of those things, you end up talking about another otherwise proper topic for a private meeting. You can't talk about it because you didn't notice it. Well, maybe who's gonna find out? I don't know. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how things in some other class end up in a private meeting, in an executive session, and the very next morning there's a newspaper article on it about what was discussed. So none of that stuff surprises me anymore. I'm not saying you do it or not, I'm just saying it happens, and that's why we have these rules. Because then, you have a violation, you involve other people, and if it's a fiscal matter, State Board of Accounts gets involved, and you have a whole host of problems. There's a whole lot of material in there, discusses a whole lot more than we discussed. Anything else, any questions you have, just call us. But that should be a pretty good reference guide. Alright, if there's nothing else, we can close the meeting.
I would like to ask the board one thing, if that's
Yeah.
okay. Okay, so when I do the minutes, I've been sending them to you guys on Friday before the next council meeting, so is that working for you guys? I mean, are you guys like, I was kinda thinking if you had any changes, if you could get them to me by Monday, or if you want something on the agenda, then you can let me know, then that way it's not like, how do you guys feel about that?
I think you've been
Is that-
been
is that
doing
okay?
one,
I
that's
mean,
fine,
you know,
yeah.
well, I haven't heard anything, and I'm like, well, okay, if I'm not hearing something, it's
No
okay.
news is good news.
I guess so. Okay.
One real quick question,
Yeah.
Manny. How does, when you table an issue,
Yeah.
how does that, what's the priority in tabling an issue?
So at any point, if there's discussion after a motion has been entertained, or even before that, so you can have somebody move to table an issue, or after there's been a motion to approve something or to not approve something, at any time before that motion is carried through, you can have somebody ask to table the issue. And you table it until the next meeting. And you can keep tabling it at a certain point, all day long, as long as we have the votes to do it. And it doesn't really affect it one way or another, it just gives you an opportunity to get more information on it, to talk to other people about it, and to bring it up next time.
So you actually table an issue, if you wanna table it, you do it prior to taking a vote on that issue?
Yeah, normally, yes.
Even
Although
before you get a
you
motion.
can take it after a motion has been pending, but not after a motion has been carried through and moved on.
I have a question about advertising
Yeah.
the meetings. Like, should we just always like put an agenda in the one in here? Should I be advertising these, our council meetings every month? You know what I'm saying?
These are short answers.
Well, but I wondered
What was that?
We do it at the beginning of the year, our regular meetings.
So
Well,
here,
I bet
Tuesday,
we
unless it's a special
did.
meeting.
We did, but when I was asking Robin about that when I first started, because I can remember in some of our classes, talking about advertising them at the beginning of the year, and then she had went through the Times, I believe. They used to send her something, and so I went through Stewart, the reporter, and he didn't know anything about it. And so I asked another court treasurer that we're friends with, and they said, well, they just kind of sent it, that they didn't think that we had to do that anymore. So I haven't done that,
so we had a discussion about this meeting, right? So this is a public meeting, there's the majority of you here.
And I did advertise this.
Yeah, you have
This
to
one, I did.
advertise it.
I did.
48 hours before the meeting.
Right.
That's separate from posting the agenda.
Right.
You can either, as Andy said, post it, post a notice of when the meetings will be at the beginning of the year. But the agenda, you don't have to give it up if you don't want to. If you do, then you always have to post it at the front door.
Okay.
And any of these follow-up questions or whatever, just email us and we'll do a little summary for you of what you can and cannot do. And they'll be within the retainer, it won't be anything extra.
Pardon me?
It won't be anything extra to do, it'll be within the normal retainer.
Appreciate that.
We need a
So are
motion.
we done?
Yeah, so call to adjourn this.
Okay,
public
I
meeting.
close the meeting.
I motion that we adjourn this meeting.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.